Okay, since it's 7:30, we're going to go ahead and get started while people are trickling in. We have a lot to cover and we want to make sure we're honoring everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us for our first ever autonomy panel series. We're so glad you're all here and hope you're able to walk away with some valuable information from tonight's session. We also want to invite you to join us on September 16th for a panel that's going to highlight conflict management. And then on the 30th for a panel on dating and relationships on the spectrum. So it's going to be again on the 16th, and then on the 30th, we're going to do this again with some different topics. Each panel will have different guest speakers and are sure to be informative. So we hope you join us for those as well. Please, we always ask for grace in these technological times when we're trying to do this online. If anything it happens tonight that may be amiss, we're going to try and correct it for the next one. So we're just going to ask for proactive forgiveness ahead of time for anything that may be disruptive, but we will try and do our best to make this go smooth for everybody this evening. And the reason we wanted to do a panel on accommodations in the workplace and in post-secondary settings tonight is because we can't address the issue of unemployment in the autism community without addressing some of the barriers to success in both education and work environments, because those barriers are important. We need to discuss those. So the process of navigating accommodations is not necessarily reducible to a generalizable set of steps or guidelines that work for everybody. So we know that what works for one person may not work for another. Therefore, tonight's discussion will revolve around building individuals' awareness around the following things. What accommodations and adjustments you may want or need. What ways to take ownership of your own unique academic or workplace experience. Ways to effectively ask for help, which is a learning process that should begin in high school, right? We should, in our high school career, start that process of being in charge of figuring out what we need and what helps us learn most efficiently and effectively, and how to access those things instead of having someone do it for us, because we never learn if somebody else is doing it for us, right? How to confidently identify and establish support networks and systems, and also how to independently navigate the process and the issues that might come up around stigma and disclosure, because when you get into post-secondary environments and in the workplace, that becomes a whole issue in and of itself. And we could actually do a whole session around each one of these things, but tonight, we really hope to provide an overview of information as well as to facilitate some valuable experience sharing with our panelists. And it's our hope that you will leave tonight's discussion equipped with some new tools and ideas, as well as feeling more comfortable with talking and thinking about how to best advocate for yourself. And we also want to make sure you're empowered and well-resourced in this area. So all of our presenting materials will be provided by email afterwards. We'll send it all out in the next few days to everybody. So if any of the presenters have information to share, like in a PowerPoint or contact information, we'll make sure everybody gets that as well. And lastly, we do want to remind everyone that only our panelists will be talking. So you're welcome to put your questions into the chat, and we will work on getting them towards the end of the session. So be sure to stick around for that. And there is going to be a document inside the chat that will be available for asking questions as well. So please utilize that. And we want to thank our panelists for being here. We're super excited to have them here this evening. So I'm going to ask them to go ahead. I'm going to turn it over to them to go ahead and introduce themselves to you. Let's see here. We're going to start with Delaney is going to introduce herself first.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Delaney Shiono. I am a senior at St. Edward's University, majoring in communication with a specialization in PR and advertising. I also work alongside Autism Society's Peer Mentors of Austin Coalition, creating various documents and interest surveys to launch our new program. I posted a flyer on my LinkedIn account for you all to check out. And I just uploaded my profile pic this afternoon. So check it out if you're interested.
Excellent. Thank you, Delaney. We're so glad you're here. You've done so much work with helping us get a lot of these materials together and for our autism-friendly business initiatives, and just been so involved. And we're so happy you work with us on these things. Next, we have Martha Doro from Austin Community College, and I will let Martha introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here. I'm Martha Doro. I'm an accessibility advocate at Austin Community College. in the Student Accessibility Services Department.
Thank you, Martha, for being here. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share and helping us get a better understanding of that process, especially moving from high school into college and some of those things we need to be looking for accessibility.
Definitely.
And next we have Larissa.
Hi, I'm Larissa. I'm a lead facilitator for a neurodivergent support group. I'm also a co-contributor to the Parenting Autism Coalition. And I'm an alumni from the Path Building Employment Program, and I'm also autistic.
Oh, thank you, Larissa, for being here. Another one of our superstars that helps us with brainstorming and creating ideas, and we really appreciate your presence here tonight. And I'm glad you got your camera working. I know some of us have camera issues when we first came on tonight, so I'm glad you got your camera working. Next, we have Miles.
Hi, everybody. My name is Miles Jackson. I am entering my 4th year at Austin Community College, 4th and final year, actually. I am double majoring in both music and music business. I am also the secretary of the Autism Club, Access Autism at ACC, which is a student-led organization by and for students on the autism spectrum.
Thank you, Miles. Very good. And I did want to make mention of Samantha, who is not on this call this evening. And I'm sure it's probably due to my fault. I'm not getting the link out in time. I'll try and get it sent over. But Samantha is actually the kind of the director and leader of that Access Autism program at Austin Community College. And when Miles talks this evening, we are going to have him speak to that a little bit at some point and how to get connected if students are at Austin Community College and they want to know a little bit more on how to get connected with that wonderful program. Because we know involvement in clubs and resources outside of just regular academics is really important. So Miles, thank you for being here this evening. Let's see, and next we have Disability Rights Texas. We have a couple of staff members who will be speaking to some very important issues around our rights and across various environments. So I would like to hand it over to them. Jonathan, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan De La Rosa. I'm with Disability Rights Texas. I work in the Protection and Advocacy for Beneficiaries of Social Security program. And part of what I do is I help people who are receiving disability benefits, SSI or SSDI, understand what their rights are as they go into the workplace, including understanding what discrimination looks like and also requesting reasonable accommodations.
Very, very important stuff, Jonathan. Thank you for being here. We did have the privilege of having you on our Autism Employment Empowerment Day, talk a little bit about this, and it's just very important. So we wanted to have you back to talk a little bit more around how we can apply it in our panel.
I'm certainly honored to be back. Thank you for having us.
Yes, absolutely. And Angelica is also with Disability Rights Texas. Angelica, were you able to get on the Zoom?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Yes.
I'm glad I see you now. I'm glad you made it.
Yes, my name is Angelica Sander. I'm an attorney at Disability Rights Texas. But although I'm an attorney, sometimes I wear very many different hats, from providing legal representation to maybe having a role more of an advocate. But my focus is really trying to bridge that gap between student and the college or the university when there is some type of breakdown.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We will have Angelica talk a little bit about talk about this a little bit more towards the end of our first session of this presentation tonight, which is going to be we're going to discuss accommodations for school and any kind of post-secondary environment out of high school. One of the things we will kind of address on the in the periphery of all this is the importance of involvement in this process, starting in middle school and in high school, of understanding accommodations and how those get set up and how students can, become more self-determined in how those are handled and just kind of deciding what they need. Because it does become very much on the onus of the student to access those things once they get into post-secondary environments. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So if you just be brainstorming any questions you may have around that you want to put into the chat. But let's go ahead and start with some questions we have for our panelists. So one of the first questions that we had for tonight was, we're going to dive right in, was what was the experience like for you accessing accommodations in an education setting? So what was the experience like accessing accommodations in an education setting? And you can either answer from the perspective of being in high school or in college. And so I would like to go ahead and hand that question over to all three of our panelists, starting with Delaney.
So now that I'm in college, asking for accommodations is certainly a lot different compared to high school. With high school, I basically had the SPD staff and the 504 staff already on deck to do all that for me. But once I got to college, it was on me to be more proactive with getting my accommodations to my professors. So at St. Ed's, we have an app called Box. So every year I reach out to Laura, who is the 504 accommodation coordinator, to ask for my accommodations. She shares them in Box with me, and then I can send my accommodations to my professors via Box. However, on the first day of my classes, it's up to me to tell my professors, hey, I shared my letter with you on Box. Do you have any questions about any of my accommodations? And they're pretty simple. All I need really is extra time on exams. And I usually take them in the testing center because I like having a quiet space. And some of my classes don't even require exams at all. So my accommodations don't really count for that. But when there are tests for my classes, I found that most of my professors have been really accommodating about giving me accommodations to support my needs. So that's been really helpful all 4 years.
Thank you, Delaney, for sharing that. And I'll hand that question over to Miles now. What was the experience like for you accessing accommodations in an education setting?
So when I was in the process of enrolling in high school after having been homeschooled since first grade, I met with a psychiatrist, and that was when I was first diagnosed officially with autism. And by assessing what my needs were in testing settings and all that, and what accommodations made most sense, we kind of formulated a list of the accommodations that I would need throughout high school, and there was a pretty big variety of them at first. And the most important one was making sure that I get 100% extra time on tests and quizzes, because I have a slow processing speed. That's like the most prevalent trait of my autism. So it was really important that I got the 100% extra time on tests and quizzes. And when I got to college, most of the other more trivial accommodations that I had, I either never used at all or didn't use that much. So I ended up really not needing them. So when I got to college, I needed to advocate for myself a little more. Like some teachers in high school helped me in the process of enrolling at ACC and getting the accommodations and who to reach out to. And it was part of the application process. And then finally, before actually starting my first classes there, I was in contact with SAS, and I got my accommodation sheets, and pretty much now the only accommodations that I still use to this point are the 100% extra time on tests and quizzes, and extra breaks on the tests and quizzes as well. But yeah, it's been overall, it's been pretty smooth going. I just now that I'm in college, I do need to reach out and pretty much just ask more to make sure that I get in touch with the right people to make sure I'm provided with the accommodations I still need.
Thank you so much, Miles, for sharing that. And I love that you talked about asking. This one thing, common thing. I've heard you and Delaney say a couple common things, but that whole asking, and then kind of, we almost need to be scaffolded into that with practicing that as much as we can, maybe in high school, like having that support person there to help. How do we ask? Who do we ask? And what do we ask, right? Because sometimes we don't even know what we need to ask for. So having that help until you can do it on your own is super important. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Now, Larissa, we would love to hear from you on this question.
So I actually didn't have my autism diagnosis at the time, but I did have my ADHD diagnosis. So I don't believe that would have changed my accommodations much, but I was easily able to obtain accommodations in college because I had an IEP or individualized education plan in high school. I already knew what kinds of accommodations I might need. I also had no trouble obtaining doctor notes to access accommodations. And I had a doctor that used the letter that he wrote for my high school accommodations as a template. As a result, I had a detailed note about what accommodations I might need.
Very good. I'm sure that was probably really helpful as well, having that. Larissa, did you have to ask for that note or did the doctor offer it?
I had to ask for it.
And so the next questions kind of follow suit with this, and I would love for all three, Larissa, Miles, and Delaney, to kind of tackle the next two questions. The next question is, what could have made the whole experience better for you? I mean, even if you have to kind of retroactively go back a little bit, what do you think would have made, and the answer may be nothing because it was a good experience, but is there anything you felt would have made the whole experience of accessing accommodations better?
I guess for me, maybe learning more self-sufficiency skills, because that's something I wasn't really taught my senior year of high school going into college. I mean, sure, I could apply it for my schoolwork, but I've never had to apply it anywhere else beyond that. So maybe learning how to self-advocate for myself in a college environment prior to actually starting at St. Ed's would be more helpful, because I feel much more comfortable, I guess, asking for accommodations that way.
Thank you, Delaney. Sometimes it helps to have a practice run too, to kind of go and see what it looks like and have to walk through the
Yeah,
process.
like doing a test run. In a
Yeah.
way.
Larissa or Miles, do either one of you want to tackle that question?
Yeah, I can just say that for me, I think, like I said, it's all gone pretty smoothly overall in terms of making sure I always get my accommodations, both in high school and college. I would say, like in college, though, where it's a little bit more on me to make sure that things are getting done right. Yeah, just I'm not being afraid to like take the first step to reach out, because like if like something's not getting done, they're not going to chase me down. So I just need to make sure I'm not afraid and just willing to reach out, and making sure that that things are getting done. And even if I like needed to force the issue, don't like be afraid of like making sure you're staying on top of that.
That's a really good point. Like nobody's going to chase you down, so you got to stay on top of it. Larissa, did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I do. My experience would have been better if my professors had been more involved or willing to help me find a note taker, because I often had trouble finding a note taker, even with the small mini compensation that was offered at the time. Sometimes I needed to obtain notes from my professors because I was unable to get a reliable note taker, and we tried audio recorders, but I didn't find them helpful. Something else that would have made my experience better would have been knowing when there was a bonus question on exam in class. When I tested in the accessibility office, I would miss out sometimes on a bonus question in class. It also would have been helpful to know ahead when there was going to be a class discussion, and maybe even have an option to like submit some of my ideas ahead, or have extra time like afterwards to submit my ideas, so I would still be able to participate.
Okay, you feel like it would have given you more of that processing time as well. And yeah, and then that's a really good point you bring up, Larissa. and one of the things that I want everyone to be aware of who's tuning in and listening is we're talking around something that is hopefully pretty universal across most post-secondary environments. So we're going to let in just a little bit when we talk to Martha from Austin Community College and to Angelica from Disability Rights Texas, we hope to address this a little bit, that it's not just Austin, Austin Community College. We have a student here represented from there, but we also have a student represented from St. Ed's, and we want everyone to kind of walk away from this feeling like, wherever you're at, there's something that can be taken away that you can use and apply to your situation if you need to. So some helpful information. So we hope that that's clear. We're just lucky to have representation with where we're at. So. And so Larissa kind of answered the next question a little bit, which is real, one of the questions, and, we struggle with the way to word this one, just because the next question basically starts with, what do you think could have made the experience worse for you? Right. Kind of thinking, I know sometimes it's easy to go into these situations thinking, what's the worst case scenario? What if this happens? What if I go in and this happens? For example, not feeling like you could approach your professors, or not having clear enough instructions for your paperwork. I guess the two questions would be, what do you think could have made that whole experience worse for you? And would you mind sharing your biggest worry, your biggest barrier or worry about the process of accessing accommodations? And for that question, we can start with Miles and go to Delaney and Larissa. Larissa, if they want to answer that as well.
So what would have been worse?
What's something that you would almost say cautionary, that this is what, was there anything you were afraid of having happen in approaching the process of accessing your accommodations?
Yeah, I just mostly, I don't want to be accused of asking stupid questions sometimes, because I know some teachers can get annoyed by that depending on their individual policies, but I'm thinking I don't know if when I first coming into to college, and I know the people in these departments are really busy, so if I'm I don't know if I was concerned that I was expected to already have learned how the accommodation process works in college while in high school, so I'm knowing what to expect and stuff, and making sure that I know how it all works, and having to get the stuff. I know I needed very specific instructions, and was asking a lot of questions when I first entered college, because there was stuff that I didn't know, and I'm where I have to request accommodations each semester, not just at the beginning of each year in high school. So I have to go to the SAS office before the start of each semester, and when they were explaining to me those rules, and I'm yeah, really, you have to do it that way? I'm a little bit confused. It was very different, and I did get nervous that I was asking stupid questions, but they seem to be okay with that.
Well, Miles, thank you for sharing that, because that is, sometimes it's hard to ask for help because has anybody else asked for this? Are we the only ones? Is this, how will this be taken? So I really appreciate you sharing that. Does anybody else want to tackle that one?
Yeah, so when it comes to talking to my professors about my accommodations, there's always this uncertainty I get, because I don't know how receptive professors are going to be toward accommodations and my needs. Because for the most part, all the professors I've had have been supportive, but I've had classmates and friends on the autism spectrum. I'm not going to name names here for obvious reasons, but they've had professors who haven't been receptive or supportive of their accommodations. So I've always gone into these meetings with my professors with a little bit of caution, because I don't know how I'm going to react if I find myself in that kind of situation.
Delaney, do you think that's from a lack of training and understanding of disabilities and autism in general?
Well, it's ironic because St. Edward's prides itself on diversity and inclusion. So to hear from classmates and friends that professors have been supportive of their accommodations is surprising in a way. I don't know how or why behind that.
Yeah, well, maybe that's part of the conversation of prompting the diversity and inclusion conversation, moving autism into that conversation a little bit more, right? And having focusing that spotlight. So Delaney, thank you for sharing. Larissa, did you want to add anything before we move on?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, all right.
Amy?
And yeah,
I'm so sorry to interject, but Martha mentioned that she has a comment she'd like to share.
oh, thank you for telling me that, because for some reason I need to pull it up so I can see it. Martha, go ahead.
If it's okay, I know I'm sort of out of order, but Delaney, I'm hearing you say that sometimes your instructors weren't receptive, and I can tell you that my first piece of advice to students is that they never have to explain or defend their accommodations. By the time you give something to your instructor, it's a notification that your accommodations are approved. And so your first step, if you ever have any issues with an instructor, is to contact us. My title is advocate. That's what I'm here to do. So if I have to go in and talk to an instructor or a department chair about, hey, you have a responsibility, a legal one, to provide these accommodations. How are we going to make this happen? I'll do it.
Thank
And
you.
I know that at private universities, it can be a little bit different. Sometimes they've got different rules. But as far as ACC, because we're federally funded, public funded, we're right there to help if something like that happens with students.
Well, thank you so much, Martha. And actually, I'm going to go ahead because our panelists have actually answered the subsequent questions pretty much. And we may circle back around. If there was a question on there about if they wanted to share accommodations they might need, but they have shared that. I've heard sounds like there's some common threads of needing extra time, extra processing time and a quiet place to study. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it to you, Martha, if you don't mind, to go ahead and talk about the process of accessing accommodations at the post-secondary level with your experience and anything else you want to add there.
Sure. And I mean, I don't want to, I could talk for a long time about this. But I think from what some of you have said, the panelists already, the things you guys have mentioned are things that I would begin with. And one is to prepare, to be prepared when you're going to college, the first time you go to college, the first time you're going to ask for accommodations. Transition planning starts at age 14. So you have those opportunities to lead your meetings at school. Practicing advocating for yourself can be ordering at the restaurant, asking for what you want, getting help at a store, making phone calls, doing job interviews. It could be anything. But I think, Delaney, that point about more practice advocating for yourself is very well taken. At the same time, when students are requesting accommodations, Miles, there's no stupid questions. And we will take as many questions as you want to ask. Because we know that this is new for students, whether it's their first time in college, they're the first person in their family to attend college. So we're going to answer those questions. Pretty much any federally funded school, post-secondary, college, university, what have you, follows the same guidelines and rules. It's the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504. So those carry over to college. The big change, I think, for a lot of students, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is that the process resets and students have to request accommodations and qualify for services, which just means they provide some sort of documentation verifying their diagnosis. And a lot of students and a lot of students' parents either aren't aware of this or aren't prepared for this, or just think, oh, we can still do it the way we've done it. And it can be very difficult to make that big shift on the fly when school's already started or you're already on campus. So at least at ACC, we try to make it very, very simple. We just tell students to contact us and we explain to them, fill out the short online application, provide some kind of documentation, at least something for us to start with, that verifies your diagnosis, and then we meet. Right now we meet like this or by phone, and we just talk about what are your needs, what's helped you in the past. Another caution is that accommodations students have had in kindergarten through 12th grade may not carry over. But what I would also say for us in student accessibility services is that we will also refer students to any number of services outside the scope of accommodations. Some students receive tutoring, additional academic assistance. Well, that's not an accommodation in college, but there are tutoring services, one-on-one, small group. We have learning labs on every campus. Right now, they're virtual as well. But we will talk to students about the different services that are available. ACC has success coaches, academic coaches. All these services are free to students as part of their accommodations. So once we've met with students, talked with them in some detail about what's your diagnosis, but more importantly, what are the challenges that come out of that diagnosis? How does it manifest in the classroom when you're taking tests? You guys have talked about like extra time is the most important thing. You need time to process. If there's other, like if you have learning disabilities on top of it or ADHD, anything like that. So we're going to look at everything and provide the accommodations that we are able to. That reminds me of a third significant change. K-12, we're talking about success. Push, pull, or drag them in. They're going to make sure you pass, going to make sure you graduate. They're going to change curriculum. When you get to college, it's access. Access to programs and curriculum, equal opportunity to participate. Success becomes the student's job. And I'm seeing questions. If you feel like your accommodations aren't working, contact us. We can tweak accommodations at any time.
Did you see that was the question Angelica had asked about?
Yes.
Yeah, they feel like their current accommodations.
You can modify accommodations the day after. It's fluid. And especially for students who are new or who haven't had them before, there's a bit more requirement or expectation that approved accommodations have a direct correlation to a diagnosis. So there's some things, we see a lot of what I call kitchen sink accommodations where I think, okay, they're just doing whatever they can. I don't see a correlation to what's diagnosed, but okay, we'll talk about it and see if there's a connection. And sometimes we have to kind of divert and find other ways to support students instead of providing some of the same accommodations they've had. But we also try not to leave anybody hanging. If there's something that's not an accommodation, we'll talk about a support service that ACC offers that will help either build a skill. There's online workshops on how to take notes, how to manage test anxiety, time management, and academic coaches work on those things as well with students. So I always tell students we're the place to start, even if it's not about accommodations. Is that a good start?
That is good, Martha. Thank you so
Okay.
much. And I do have the information that you sent me with, kind of those handouts that we can make sure we get out to everybody that's tuning in this evening, in case there's any, they want to use those to look through them or find out any information. And I think this kind of goes back to what Miles, Delaney, and Larissa were all talking about asking, getting in the habit and the process of finding someone that you trust, that you can ask questions to, because a lot of times it's building that relationship of, hey, I know this person, I know they're a safe person for me to go to and ask this question. And especially the process being fluid, because as we get older and as we get into different education environments and learning environments, whether it be certification programs or four-year universities or two-year colleges, whatever it may be, we are fluid. Our how we learn, and a lot of times how our habits change. Sometimes our learning preferences change, and so we need to be able to adjust to that and ask for help when we need it. So I do appreciate you mentioning that, and I'll be sure and send out the information you provided. That's a great start. I would love for Angelica asked a question. I would love for Angelica to chime in now and talk about anything pertinent to this topic around what Disability Rights Texas does in assisting students, and also talk about one of the clinics they're doing.
Well, regarding everything that Martha said, I echo all of that. I guess the part where you could say I come in sometimes is when there isn't that good relationship with the student and the disability office or their professor. And so that's when it's helpful to the student to have kind of a support person outside of the university. And a lot of times what I do, and Jonathan, has been part of some of my cases too, is to just be an advocate and talk to the school and communicate, the issues that the student is having. And a lot of times we're able to have a good kind of restore that relationship or communication to the point that the student can, continue school and feel satisfied with the accommodations that they have. And feel free to pipe in, Jonathan, because, you've helped me in a couple of my cases, so.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much echo what Angelica says. Like, it's really, part of what we do is we help people, we advocate for people, but we also try to help people self-advocate as well. One thing I've learned in this process of helping people is that when we advocate for them, and we assist them, then a lot of people gain the skills needed to advocate for themselves going forward. And it's really, really important, no matter which setting you're in, to always advocate for your rights.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess something I should say, if there isn't that, good relationship with the school or the disability office, students do also have rights to file complaints and whatnot. So they don't feel like, oh, well, I can't do anything about it. And I know the disability office as well will help them through that process of filing complaints and whatnot.
Okay, and Angelica, is there something you see addressed a lot, like something you see come through, like any issues that you see that are more common than others in this area?
Yes.
That you can share freely.
Yes. I would say there's a couple. One that Martha talked about is providing, when you transition to a post-secondary education institution, you have to submit again, medical documentation supporting your diagnosis and whatnot. And sometimes, and for example, say someone has a physical disability and they will provide support documents about that. But then they also have like an invisible disability. Say they have ADHD or something, and they don't provide, support for that. And so I've seen sometimes the disability office, is hesitant to provide accommodations for those disabilities that they don't have documents supporting that yet. And so then that's where, I work with the student, try to get that documentation, we give it to the school, and, everything's good. So just making sure that you provide the school everything ahead of time. That way, by the time school starts, your accommodations, will be ready and whatnot. And then the other situation that I've seen is where professors sometimes don't realize that they do have this responsibility to provide the accommodations that are approved. Either that, or they don't know how to provide them. Like sometimes there can be a technology gap, especially, when COVID happened, that we all, education became all virtual. There was that gap, and, some professors just didn't know how to do Zoom and record and all of that stuff. So those are kind of the more typical problems or issues that I see and that we try to address.
Okay, well, thank you for talking about that, because that is something that a whole new set of challenges that we're faced, in trying to do online learning, and that's it can be really tough to tackle. And I love what I kind of, when Martha talked earlier about being an advocate, to go talk to a professor and help say, hey, listen, this is what's in the student's paperwork. I think a lot of times there's, and I would love for any of the panelists to chime in, Miles, Delaney, Larissa, but sometimes I feel like there's just a lack of understanding. I think people, I want to assume good, and I think people have a heart to help, and people have a heart to want to see people be successful, right? I think it's just oftentimes that lack of understanding is a barrier, And so ways that we can help move that forward. And I love kind of what Angelica and Martha, what you're saying. It sounds like these services offer that. Larissa, and I would be interested to see if our panelists had any, Larissa, Delaney, or Miles, if you had any comments around any of this. It's okay if you don't.
So in the past year, St. Ed's, SDS, and I have tried working together to establish a student organization founded by SDS to kind of bring more students, autism and non the autism spectrum, to kind of increase like their knowledge on the autism spectrum and individuals on the autism spectrum in general. Unfortunately, that hasn't panned out because COVID kind of ruined our plans, but we're starting our SDS meetings again in a few weeks, and more people are planning to join this year. So we're gonna see if we can actually get this off the ground.
That's wonderful, Delaney. I love that you're such a connector and a campaigner for these things, and I love that you're there to help them with this.
Well, prior to now, I've been the only one attending the SDS meetings because apparently Friday afternoons don't work out for most people. So it's felt different in the past, me being the only one there. But now that more people are coming back, I'm gonna have to readjust again and get more used to being around more people.
Yeah, absolutely. Just stay safe while you're doing it. Larissa, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Delaney said. So I think helping reduce stigma would be helpful, particularly with acceptance. I also don't know if there's many like alliance. I was thinking, how there's LGBT alliance, but that with autism, I know that there are allies, but I feel like it would help for neurotypicals to understand more and just, again, general education.
Thanks for that, Larissa. We do as much of that as we can with our faculty. We do extensive training and talk with them a lot. And Angelica, if I can, Amy, I just wanted to come back to documentation real quick, because there's that movement away from that medical model to the social model. So if someone doesn't have that documentation in hand right away, we'll provide what we would call temporary or provisional accommodations, give the student time either to track it down, talk with somebody, get an update, something to verify. But I've also talked with students who said, I'm 30 years old, I was diagnosed in grade school, and that was in Vermont. I have no idea how to get a hold of it. And we're like, okay, fine. If the student can describe it and report it, we're good to go.
Thank you for clarifying that, Martha. That's really helpful
Sure.
to have. And I would love just for and Angelica, if there's any contact information as well that could, I know, Martha, thank you for putting your information into the chat. Angelica, if you wouldn't mind doing that as well, like if there's, a way to, and if there's any, I know you have the clinics you guys do with Disability Rights Texas and helping students prepare for, understanding what they'll need for college and stuff. Did you want to speak to that at all? Or
Yes, I totally forgot earlier. So I just put my email in the chat. It's asander@drtx.org. And yeah, since I believe maybe early 2020, yes, right after everything shut down, we started doing these online clinics where we just kind of talk about, what are your rights as a student with a disability, very similar to what we're talking about today, but maybe a little bit more emphasis on kind of the legal rights. And, if you guys would think it would be helpful, please sign up for our next one. We are probably done for this year, but I do have a recording of our previous one. So if you just send me an email, I'm more than happy to share that.
thank you so much, because I think that kind of is the information that helps empower people to know, okay, well, I understand the process to walk through, but also would like to know what my rights are and how do I access that help if I need to. And we're so glad that you guys are there helping advocate in that way. So, and Miles, before we transition into the workplace, I would love for you to share a little bit about access, ACC access. Would you mind doing that for me? For everybody?
So Access Autism, as I mentioned, it's by and for students on the autism spectrum at ACC. We're primarily a social group. So what we practice within our weekly meetings are social skills, where we talk about social thinking and how that comes before social skills, and perspective taking is a huge thing that we discuss and learn about, because that kind of those kinds of social dynamics can be really hard for a lot of students on the autism spectrum, and it's really important that they understand those social dynamics and nuances. So we do a lot of practicing and social thinking, and then we practice the social skills, which leads into the overall perspective taking, which comes into knowing how to properly put yourself in another person's shoes, and realize, like, okay, how is this person thinking if I do this? Like, what kind of feelings will that create, and all of that. So all the perspective taking stuff that can be difficult for students on the autism spectrum, we are very focused on that. Also, we talk about ways that students can advocate for themselves. We share our different experiences as autistic people, and we get to know each other on a deep level, and like build good relationships amongst each other. And it's all very much social based. And then in addition to that, we've put on various events, we put on one in-person one, and then we ended up doing a virtual one last year after COVID happened, where it's all about educating the general public on autism awareness and for people to understand it better. So it ultimately will help to make the community a more accepting environment to people on the autism spectrum.
Thank you, Miles. That sounds like a really great organization. And I've had a chance to get to know you and Samantha and Iva and some of the other members. And you guys are doing amazing stuff for Austin Community College, that whole community. And I would love it if you would put in the chat, if you don't mind, Miles, a way to contact you. I'm trying to get Samantha's email copied into the chat, but if you wouldn't mind putting your email, and Samantha Thompson, she's the director of that particular program at ACC. So, in my conversation with Martha the other day, we were talking about how important it is that students get plugged into, clubs and social, ways to be social with other students as much as possible, and stuff that's outside of academics. And this is a great way to do it, and building community. And so Miles is going to put that information in the chat if anybody's interested. Yeah, and thank you so much, Miles. We really appreciate you sharing all that. And I'm going to go ahead, and Jordan's going to, real quick, I'm sorry, before we move along, Angelica is going to have to hop off after this section's over. So if anybody has a question for Angelica specifically, we can go ahead and get to those if there were any questions in the chat for any questions that came up specifically for Angelica. I just want to take a few seconds to just peruse here to make sure. Let's see here. Am I missing any?
I don't think I see any.
I don't see any. Okay. All righty. Well, if, again, I want to encourage everybody, if you have any questions or comments or for Angelica, or, want to get to know what they're doing, just be sure and reach out to her. So thank you, Angelica, for being here. And we're going to transition now to our workplace setting conversation. Jordan, do you want to introduce that part?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Jordan here, the projects coordinator with the Autism Society. So I do apologize you can't see me. My camera decided not to work moments before the meeting started. So yeah, for the next portion of the evening, we'll be talking about navigating accommodations in the workplace. Though there's a lack of qualitative research into turnover among college grads in the autism community, we might assume that part of the reason for the high unemployment rate is due to folks' reasonable accommodations not being sufficiently provided. This happens both when employees don't ask for them in the first place, as well as when employers don't provide proper support, which is also often accompanied by a non-inclusive work culture, a general lack of awareness and acceptance, sensory unfriendly workspaces, etc. Now, with regard to employees not asking for accommodations, once you get out into the working world, employees quickly find the support systems that had been in place in high school and in college don't necessarily look the same, as Miles and Martha, I believe, spoke to earlier. So, instead of paying to be there, you're now paid to carry out your job duties. Instead of reporting to a teacher or a professor, you're reporting to a boss or a supervisor. And these changes can influence, your confidence or willingness to disclose and, or ask for the things you need in order to most successfully carry out your job, even if you're well aware of what has worked for you in the past. So yeah, with more on this transition, hand it back to you guys. I'll hand it back to Amy here.
Thank you, Jordan. All right, so this is one of our favorite topics to discuss is, the workplace. In fact, through Autism Society of Texas, we have a pre-employment training program where we cover a lot of these topics over a period of 6 months, meeting about twice a month. And a new cohort is going to start in October. So I'll put our email address inside the chat if anyone's interested in contacting us about how to be a part of that. It's a free program because it's with a grant through the city of Austin. So I'll be sure to put that contact information in the chat if anybody's interested. But let's go ahead and move to the questions we have for our panelists, because the workplace, the statistics around unemployment in the autism community it can be really daunting when you look at them. And what we want to do is not only try to figure out how to have these discussions to talk about, to build awareness around it, but also to be thinking about what can we be asking of businesses and organizations and employers, right? To meet us, right? To have to meet, instead of just putting the onus on somebody to, to show up and act in a certain way that may be more typical, or what, all these things, these jargons, these things that we speak around the bigger issue of, no, we need to bring the conversation into how can we be more inclusive and promote these programs that are going to do that. So how can we bring awareness and understanding? So what do we need to ask of employers and businesses and organizations as well, and educate and inform them on? Because I think, again, we're going back to people wanting to do the right thing. They're just not quite sure, how to approach it. So let's start with our first question. So how can the interview and pre-hiring process be made easier for a job seeker to access employment? And I would love to throw that first question to Larissa.
Companies should consider across the board changes for every applicant. Consider alternative job postings and application processes. Typically, a job posting will provide lots of information and ask for people to send resumes. Then the hiring manager decides who to interview. I know some autism hiring initiatives have candidates do novel tasks while the supervisor watches. I know I would personally perform worse in that setting, and it would not show my true ability. I would suggest that self-advocates consider looking for job postings that ask candidates to solve a problem and determine who to interview by identifying the best solutions, or look for jobs that request job candidates show a sample of work for given specifications. For me, I've looked for ones that ask for writing samples so I can show my ability. Some companies should consider allowing the interview questions to be given to all applicants in advance. This would help those with social anxiety and other disabilities as well, or consider giving out the general topics for the interview ahead. Also, be aware of unnecessary qualifications and requirements in job descriptions. Ideally, corporations should avoid requirements such as strong communication skills required in the job description if it is not an essential job function. Some organizations include this even when it is not needed for the job. Self-advocates can ask if it is an essential job function before discounting the position. Also, self-advocates can ask for a virtual interview option. Hopefully, this is a temporary solution, but right now it's a lot easier to get virtual interviews with the pandemic happening. Also, if eye contact, smiling, and body language are not essential job functions, ideally the employer should make sure this behavior is not influencing hiring decisions. Often candidates are informally assessed on their delivery of their answers and not just the content. For instance, at my first job, the manager said that my eye contact and smiling was a factor in deciding to hire me. I was unable to keep up with that on the job. I didn't know at the time that I'd been over masking at the interview. Masking is trying to hide or minimize autistic traits and appear neurotypical. Self-advocates can explain during an interview how they feel and that they may not show emotions the same way others might. Lastly, being told when you've shared enough could help. I know sometimes I ramble when I'm nervous, so I would find that helpful. And also prompting if I don't give enough information is something I could personally benefit from. And also possibly a second chance interview.
Oh, Larissa, those are so many really great points. I mean, you just kind of constructed this mountain of just wow with that whole presentation there of things that can be done to make it more accessible, to make employment more accessible for people. And you're right, there's so much jargon that gets used in just job descriptions like those, you know, you don't think about it, but good communication skills, you see that on every single like requirement. It's like, okay, well, what does that even mean? What do you give me specifics about what you're expecting me to do in an interview? And the whole issue around masking it's a real thing, and it creates so many mental health. It can create, you know, so many mental health issues as a result. And so it's important to continue having that conversation. Does anybody else want to add to what Larissa said or comment? Well, I'm going to move on to our next question then. And Larissa, we may circle back around to some of that because you said a lot of really important stuff and you gave some really fantastic suggestions. And especially you talked about asking for the interview questions or having the interview questions provided ahead of time to give people time to prepare and process those questions. And I'm just curious, how comfortable would you feel asking for those? I mean, I don't think you should have to, but how comfortable would you feel asking for those?
Honestly, it depends on what position. That's why I've actually starting to look at nonprofits. Well, that's not the full reason I actually really am passionate about advocacy, so it makes sense. But also, it kind of helps solve that problem because there's still a stigma, and I don't know if it would affect it, but I know how I think, and I would wonder if I didn't get the job or if I didn't get asked to interview because I requested the questions ahead. It's just something that I would worry about.
Yeah, because then that goes back to that stigma. Am I creating a stigma in their mind of myself if I'm asking for those? Are they going to, because we do live in a very ableist society, right? Of how people view what people are capable of based on the questions they ask maybe, or how they present themselves. And instead of the content of character and the actual, you know, what the person has to bring to the table in a practical and applicable sense. And so, yeah, that addresses that. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. Delaney, I have a question for you regarding this. What specific details of the pre-hiring process in your own experience do you feel allows you to show your strengths? Because we want to come to an interview with strengths in that pre-hiring process.
So every employer has like their own pre-hiring process. Some of them, a lot of them require a resume. Most require a cover letter. Some employers, once you complete all the pre-application process, they give you some additional applications, I guess. One of them that I had was like a little personality test. So employers could kind of get a sense of what you're like. And some organizations require you to submit like a portfolio of some of your work, especially if you're applying for like a advertising or creative industry. But I feel the most prominent seal of the deal is the interview, because that gives you a chance for someone to actually see you in person. Because a resume, a cover letter, everything else you submit before that is only a part of who you are. The interview is your chance for someone to get to know you and see if you're a good fit for the organization. And it's also the most nerve-wracking process if you're on the autism spectrum, especially when they ask you the really difficult questions. One of the most common ones that I've gotten is, what are your biggest weaknesses? And that's something I feel a lot of us aren't willing to admit. I feel we kind of try to mask our faults in a way to feel like we're inferior, we know it all, but we can't hide our weaknesses forever. Everybody has their own faults in some way.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Delaney, because it is the hiring, that interview process can be so daunting, and just, especially if you're not prepared for some of those questions that may come up,
And Larissa mentioned the fact that you don't get the questions before you go into an interview makes you wonder, like, what's gonna come at me the minute I walk in this door. So.
Yeah, and the anxiety itself can kind of inhibit you from being able to show your true talent and skills because you're so worried about what the next question's going to be. So,
although I will mention this too, some organizations do like a group interview, so you're not the only one in the room. You have other people in the room with you. I don't know where that's better, that's worse, and what do y'all think? And
it would be worse or I would find it worse. Except I did do a group interview before and I actually was good at it. So it depends.
I personally would find it worse because I think it would be hard to focus with for me, like with other people in there listening as well, and I wouldn't have the interviewers undivided attention. So when he's trying to focus on everyone, I would kind of get the feeling like I may not be getting the full attention from him, which if he's making a decision on whether or not to give me the job, I really want him to really given me the full attention.
Yeah, both of you bring up really good points. One-on-one, you at least have more of that connection, but the group one kind of decreases that comfort of being all by yourself in a way. So I don't know, it's kind of a mixed bag.
I would love to know about workplace accommodations. We talked earlier about school accommodations. You guys shared some accommodations that you have found work for you. And a lot of this, we get into a lot of this is preceded by conversations of learning preferences, and especially as we get older, how that presents itself in different environments. What are some accommodations that you feel would benefit you in a workplace setting, if you don't mind sharing those? And that's for all three of you, by the way.
So I haven't actually had a permanent job yet. At least I've had plenty of seasonal jobs, but they've lasted so short. I feel asking for accommodations wouldn't be that appropriate. I will, though, mention some accommodations that other classmates and friends of mine have asked for. Some individuals don't really like the bright lighting in a room, so they prefer to work in a room where the lights are dim or off altogether, because a lot of individuals on the autism spectrum are sensitive to their environment, and lighting is one of them. And
thank you, Delaney.
So I just got my first job over the summer, and I don't have any accommodations. I don't really think I need any. However, I do want there to always be someone available to ask questions to for the time being. And I want to make sure that there's someone who I feel comfortable always asking questions to, and then someone who will supervise and make sure that I'm doing the right thing for the time being until I've been there long enough to really know that I'm doing everything right.
So some of that guidance.
Yes, like a little bit of extra guidance, pretty much.
Mhm.
I had a couple accommodations that helped me. One was I had some of my job tasks were modeled for me so I could be faster at my work. I also had complex tasks broken down into smaller parts or chunks. And I also had it explained to me which tasks I had to multitask and which tasks I had to do one at a time singularly. I also had a little bit of on-site informal mentoring. I had somebody that would talk to me about how to respond to rude customers and social skills during my first job. I also had job restructuring. A couple of the marginal functions or side tasks of my job was delegated elsewhere. Employers are not required to restructure the essential functions of a job. I would personally find it helpful to have accommodations about noise because I get very distracted with background noise. Some of that could be as simple as being allowed to wear noise canceling earplugs or being able to shut the door if you're in office. Also, it would be helpful to know when something's going to happen. I know that can't happen every time, but for like certain meetings, it would be nice to know ahead.
Thank you, Larissa, for sharing those. Those are some really great ideas. And I know we've talked a little bit about in our pre-employment program about some things that we can do proactively, and especially in the onboarding process of getting a new job. So it may not look like we think, and I think sometimes when we talk about accommodations, again, it goes back to it's not just a singular thing, right? It can be a multitude of things. So it may not even be something you necessarily ask for in a workplace setting. It may be something that you prepare yourself with, like having a kit with you that you carry with you, maybe in your bag, or you keep at your desk, whatever, that has earplugs or maybe glasses, or maybe something that makes you feel comfortable at work, snacks, things that, water, just those kind of things that are going to help get you through your day. And the names of people the names and contact information of people that you can go to for help or specific questions. If you have them, you have a designated person at work, you can ask, but on the onboarding process, even just mapping out the environment before your first day, right? Like, so what to expect before the first day starts, if that's a possibility. So those kind of things are things we can do to help make that starting a job process a little bit smoother for ourselves. I would like to ask you all a question about peer support systems being put in place, like employment resource groups, because when we're talking about joining an employment resource group, right? There's a certain element of the disclosure conversation, which we're going to go into here in a little bit with Disability Rights Texas. We're going to discuss that a little bit more. But how do you in general feel about peer support systems being in place, specifically catering to employees with autism? And any
Would
of you
these support groups be within the organization or outside the organization?
Employment resource groups are typically within the organization.
Okay. Yeah, I feel that'd be a really good idea to bring more individuals on the autism spectrum into those respective organizations, offering various training programs to prepare them for the kind of work offered in that organization. And also, if they experience like a conflict with a supervisor or colleague in the organization, the resource groups could be a good place to talk with someone if they don't feel comfortable talking with a supervisor about it.
Thank you, Delaney. And the other kind of the other kind of question that I had around this is, how can neurodiversity hiring initiatives and employment resource groups and things like that, and this may not be a question that we can answer right away, maybe something just to think about, but how can tokenism be avoided of individuals with autism?
Well, so with tokenism in mind, I feel every individual should be given an opportunity to be in the spotlight, to put it figuratively, for a few times, and then in the background on other occasions, like a perfect balance of both. Give them opportunities to shine, give others opportunities to shine as well. Don't put people in boxes or bubbles, so to speak. And
Delaney, I think you just answered that question. Somebody asked a question about defined tokenism, and then thank you for asking that. I should have clarified when I was saying that. It's just a term that kind of refers to putting people in a box based on who they are, how they identify, or, oh, well, you're this, you must be good at this, or, oh, you're that, you know. And so making sure we're not boxing people into categories based on what we assume of them because of what they've disclosed or described about themselves. That's the best way I can describe tokenism here in the moment. If anybody else has a better description or identifier. And I just want to jump back real quick, and Larissa, I'll get to you. I wanted to, I did put a website in the chat for askjan.org, and it's a good website for going and kind of playing in and looking at possible accommodations in the workplace. And so I just wanted everyone to have that as a resource. Larissa, did you have your hand raised?
Yes. I think something that might help with the tokenism is also, it seems like there's a lot of stereotypes with advertisements or who's like featured in certain job programs. So it's just a thought that maybe making sure to include more diverse representation might help with that.
Thank you, Larissa. Okay, so what are some strategies individuals with autism can use to support their needs in the workplace without making a reasonable accommodation request or to supplement their accommodation? So Larissa, do you want to tackle that one?
Yes. 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. So there are several strategies people can do. One is just if you're trying to find out if something's socially acceptable in the workplace, try to casually ask, what do people around your workplace usually do? For instance, you could say, do y'all usually eat lunch at your desk? You could also ask about like noise canceling headphones in a discreet way. Do y'all ever wear headphones to listen to music while working? Or you could just say you get distracted with background noise. I notice a lot of people are understanding about that. Something that is helpful is also something called like a mini disclosure, where you can state your needs without stating your disability. For instance, you could say, please make sure that you're direct with me when giving directions. If you prefer detail, just say the more detail, the better. Or I prefer a quiet, distraction-free area so that I can focus and complete my work. Something that I use to help with some of my communication, to help make sure I'm more efficient with communication, is assistive technology, and it helps me with summarizing. I use word choice editors and word counts to communicate more effectively in my written communication, such as emails. I also utilize technology to help with my organization skills and working memory, which is being able to hold information in my brain. So I use to-do lists, I use reminders, and it just helps me with organization.
Thank you, Larissa. And Larissa did compile a list of some of those ideas and suggestions that I will be sending out as part of our information packet following up on this event, just kind of our resource, I guess, a resource packet, because Larissa did put some wonderful stuff in an email that I had a chance to look at earlier that covers some of this, and it's a good, because sometimes we hear things and we walk away and we're like, oh, what was that that they said and I forgot it. So I want to make sure that that everybody listening has access to those ideas beyond this event. So I'll be sure and send that out as well. Thank you, Larissa. That was very, very helpful. So does anybody else, before we move on to the next thing, does anybody else have any questions or thoughts around any of that?
I liked what was said about being direct in the workplace. Like, don't be vague. That kind of goes along with what I was saying about needing extra guidance. I need people to state the instructions, what's expected of me clearly, give specifics, don't be vague. Because I need specifics. I don't like figure things out for myself very well. I need to be explained in detail.
That's great. That is a wonderful suggestion there. Like, be direct about that need, and having, it's almost like being confronted with something in a meeting, or someone saying something and you feel pressure to answer, but you're not sure how to respond in that moment, because, some of us just need extra processing time with information in order to make a good decision, right? And so being able to say, I'm going to have to think about that for a little bit, as opposed to having to come up with an answer on the spot right away, kind of being direct about that need. It's really important. And so there was a question. Let's see here. We'll get to that question here in a little bit. One of the things I did want to ask about and kind of move into was talking about, and this topic gets, and this is one of those things that I think that becomes more of a heavier topic around all talking about accommodations in the workplace, and moving through how we manage workplace environments, is supporting our needs in the workplace and disclosure. And so, because with disclosure comes the stigma, and Larissa talked a little bit about that masking process that individuals, especially with non-apparent disabilities, tend to do in order to survive the structures we have in place. And sometimes that happens in a job situation. And so how, what are the risks? And I want to move to this question because I would like to give Disability Rights Texas, Jonathan, a chance to answer this, to talk about this as well. But I would love to field a question to the group, to Larissa, Delaney, and Miles, and then have Jonathan jump in on it. Is what are the risks of disclosing your disability, and how does stigma come into play here? And discuss any thought process, if you would like to, if you're comfortable sharing, around personal decisions to disclose and how you would make that decision. And after you guys chime in on this, I would like Jonathan to start talking around this topic as well.
So again, I've never actually had to disclose my disability yet, because I haven't had a permanent job or career. But there's always this uncertainty whenever I tell people that I have autism. There's always this uncertainty that people are going to use it against me in some way. Like, being vulnerable comes with a risk and a reward. The reward is finally getting what you have on your mind out. The risk is others using it against you.
I totally agree with that. Like, for me, I always intentionally make myself vulnerable and disclose my disability to just about anyone when I'm first meeting them, because I always feel like if I do that, then there's a much better chance that they'll understand me if I'm acting in a way that comes across as weird, or if I don't handle a situation very well, or whatever. If they know that I'm on the autism spectrum, I feel they'll understand me better when I do something that's like kind of out of the norm, or whatever. However, I also take into account that by disclosing my disability to the wrong person and becoming vulnerable to the wrong person, it can open me up to be taken advantage of. So I got to realize that as well when I'm disclosing my disability. But overall, I think the good outweighs the bad in that. I think it's a good idea for me to disclose my disability to make sure that people understand me better, and just at the same time be aware that I could potentially be making myself vulnerable to be taken advantage of. So I just got to be careful.
Thank you, Miles.
So to add to Delaney's point, I also get concerned that disclosing that my diagnosis could be used against me. I think there's a real risk of being treated differently or infantilized, which means being treated like a child, being blamed for communication issues. I've been told I'm taking something too literally when it turns out I actually wasn't. I also believe it can hinder advancement in the workplace, even though it shouldn't. On the other hand, like Miles was saying, I know if I disclose, someone might be more understanding, and I can try to hope that they won't use it against me. I also feel like if I disclose, it can help if there's something I call the double empathy problem, where two different neurotypes are unable to take the other's perspective, and it just leads to a communication breakdown. No, if someone discloses, that means both parties can be on the lookout for that type of communication breakdown better. The other thing I wanted to mention is I've had people be a lot more understanding about my sensory issues since I've disclosed. So people were a little dismissive, or very dismissive actually, when I had problems with noise. And I noticed people don't push me as much if I say I have autism when I'm having sensory problems with noise. And I also think people are more understanding when I need to stim or fidget.
Thank you, Larissa. Thank you guys for sharing. I would love to introduce Jonathan into this conversation about disclosure and employee rights. And, you know, if there's anything that he wants to add to this, or yeah, anything he thinks will be helpful here.
Yeah, so in regards to disclosing, of course, it's up to you whether you choose to or not. You are not required to disclose. As part of the reasonable accommodation process, you do have to discuss a little bit, you know, as regards to how your disability affects your work. But at the same time, in disclosing as part of the interactive process, you're not, it's discriminatory for them to treat you differently because of your disability. So should that come to pass and you notice that, okay, like I disclosed my disability, I reported it, you know, I requested these accommodations, and, you know, I may have gotten some of them, but now my boss has completely taken a different tack with me. I feel like I'm potentially being forced out of my job. That can be discriminatory. I'm actually about to attach our employment discrimination flyer in the chat for everybody to, you know, review, you know, some nice late night reading. But it does go into detail over some examples of what discrimination can look like, along with some discussions over the reasonable accommodation process, so that whenever you do disclose, you do understand your rights, in that your workplace can't use this, like they can't use that as a reason for, you know, to treat you any differently, especially if you just need accommodations to do the essential functions of your job, as well as someone who may not need accommodations.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that information. And what if an employer states that a request is unreasonable, and that how would someone tackle that issue?
So in regards to the reasonable accommodations process, what's supposed to happen is that you enter what's called the interactive process, where you and your employer sit down and you hash out the accommodations that work for you. If they're saying a request is unreasonable, then both parties should work towards finding something that would be meeting in the middle. Let's say that, for example, you have a request to work from home full time, which has been very common because of the pandemic. But maybe they do start needing you in the office for some things. Then the question is, okay, can I work, you know, some of the days from home? And then can I work other days, you know, if on days I have to go in the office, can I work in a quiet room? Can I have a dedicated space for me to work that's away from all sorts of, you know, from all the noise, which, you know, especially for places that do more customer service work, that can be really important, since everybody's talking all the time over everybody all the time. So that's a way to tackle a situation if it's being deemed unreasonable. Now, If they totally shoot down all of your requests and don't engage in the interactive process at all, then that's where we encourage people to give us a call, so that we can investigate and potentially help people to find a solution that would work. Or if it needs to be taken further than that, then we can certainly discuss that at the time in regards to filing potentially a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC for short.
Okay, that's helpful. Oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
I was saying I rambled a little bit, so if there are any questions, let me know.
It's okay. I would love to know if any of our panelists have questions for you at this time before I move on.
I had a question for you, Jonathan.
Okay.
I remember you mentioned about stigma earlier and discrimination. Sometimes it seems like it's hard to prove that, like if it's something as simple as coworkers just aren't talking to that person, or they're just not inviting them, to the lunches and stuff like that. Is there, what can somebody do if that happens, if they're basically being ostracized at work?
If someone's being ostracized at work, so it can definitely be a bit hard to prove when that's happening. And, it does make you question, like, what's going on here? We would encourage people to look up to reach out to us, because even though you may be ostracized in some ways, there may be more tangible ways around that being ostracized. For example, being passed up for a promotion, that, could be as a result of being, ostracized or treated differently from your coworkers, or being infantilized. There could be tangible ways, not just, being treated differently, but also, tangible ways around that where you can prove that you've been discriminated against.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was a good question, Larissa. And that kind of brings me, someone did ask a question in the chat earlier about how the individuals on this panel made friends in college, or have been making friends in college. And it kind of makes me, and you guys can answer that if you want, but I also am wondering, like, socially, because in a workplace setting, I know, at least before COVID, when, before things went virtual, when you're in an office setting, or in a situation where you're working with other people, oftentimes it leads to camaraderie, and it leads to making friends, because you spend a lot of time with the people you work with usually. Do any of you on the panel want to talk about what you feel like has worked for you in establishing healthy relationships in the workplace, and making friends in the workplace, or even in school?
For me, it's just mostly just being authentic and being honest, and also, like, I'm disclosing my disability when I feel appropriate to do so.
Thank you, Miles. Anybody else?
So in the summer of 2018, I was part of Bloom Consulting's On the Right Track summer camp. And throughout the camp, we had like various get-together activities outside the camp. So one time we went out to eat at Cheddar's for a practice business dinner, which is kind of typical of organizations as a social gathering, a way to bring employers and other employees together to socialize with one another. St. Ed's has also had some various like welcome events for the first week of classes, and spread out throughout the entire semester as a way to kind of get people involved with the campus. And
Delaney, do you find yourself attending those things when they offer them?
Yeah, so like the recreational centers had a few events that I've attended. I went on a hike at the Barn Springs Greenbelt at one time, and then I also went on a camping trip with them to Mustang Island the spring of 2019. So that was really cool.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I got sunburned at the beach. There wasn't a whole lot of shade. And despite the fact that I put a lot of sunscreen on, I still got sunburned. And it was really windy, so the wind blew all our tents down. So we had to leave a day early.
Sounds like an experience for sure.
But yeah, it was fun. I've never been camping before, so this was a whole new experience for me. Really fun though. So
And I think it speaks and I don't necessarily like the term showing up. You got to show up to make things happen, because sometimes we're not in a space to show up. Sometimes showing up is hard and complicated, and it feels burdensome, and just, it's hard. And I think that it has to do though with, how much do we put ourselves out there, especially with our coworkers, and how much do we say, "No, thanks, I'm good," right? And how much do we prompt and invite and try and, create those situations, and that would lead themselves to those social opportunities. And so it's kind of seems like it's almost finding that balance, right? Depending on where we're at the time. Yeah. So I was just
taking
curious.
baby steps is key. Have any of you seen the movie What About Bob with Bill Murray?
Yeah,
Love that movie.
Yeah, so there's a book called Baby Steps that's mentioned throughout the movie that applies to what you just said.
I love it. That's right. All right. Does anybody else want to say anything about forming the relationships in the workplace?
There's something that I feel would make it easier for me, and that is kind of knowing more what to expect at the social gatherings. Because sometimes information provided on the flyers isn't a lot, or it's not what I would want to know. I usually want to know stuff about like noise level and just what to expect in general. So because I also socialize better when I'm calmer, and I tend to be calmer when I feel like I'm well prepared or I know what to expect. And also I feel like sometimes the informal rules at get-togethers just aren't talked about. And sometimes it might be easy to accidentally break a social rule and then not realize what I did wrong.
What do you think would help you with that, Larissa?
That's a good question. For which part were you asking?
With like, with identifying, okay, so I want to be getting comfortable with going out, and okay, well, what if I break a social rule? And because I'm wondering how many people would even, number one, notice, but also number two, like, how do you prepare yourself for that? Like going into a social situation, like, do you make a friend at work that you say, "Hey, can you get my back and just let me know, like shoot me a glance or send me a signal if I do something?" I mean, do you script yourself ahead of time? How do you make that process easier in making that decision to go into a social situation with that concern?
I think it would be helpful if I scripted out a little bit, also if I just kind of thought about a couple different things I could do if something happened, but it's also not possible to think of like every possibility. And there is something that you did say that was interesting about, you wonder if people would even notice. So it might also be reminding myself that maybe it's not as noticeable as I thought. But also I think it would help if I had a point of contact or like a friend. It would depend on the situation, because I wouldn't want to be prompted in front of people. That would be embarrassing. It would have to be discreet.
For sure. Okay, well, thank you guys for sharing these thoughts. I know we digressed just a little bit from our original topic, but it does have, we're human beings in situations. It's not just like this one linear thing of, oh, I'm an employee and I'm robotic and I have no like life outside of what I'm doing in this one task. It's where we are multifaceted beings at work as well. And we have relationship needs at work. That doesn't change, right? And so just like we have mental health needs at work and those other things, those don't stop just because we are doing a job. So just being mindful of all that. So I would love to just tackle a couple more questions, and then we're going to get to our question or any of our questions that came up in the chat. So we can close out the night. I know this is these are long sessions, and we want to make sure we're honoring everyone's time. So I would just love to know, there is a question in here about how do you think businesses and organizations can customize support with co-occurring neurodivergence or disabilities? Because there are high rates of ADHD, anxiety, dyspraxia, dyslexia with autism, right? So it's, so we're addressing also oftentimes a multitude of things that come up in the workplace. And so how do you think businesses and organizations can customize support, keeping that in mind? And any of you can answer if you'd like.
Okay, so there's a few ways, because one would be to focus on workarounds for executive function issues, since a lot of neurodivergencies share executive function dysfunction or problems of planning, organizing, and problem solving. That would be being diligent about reminders and making sure that there's clear-cut instructions. Also explaining when there's giving clear deadlines would help, and just different tools that could help with organizing. And also working memory is another thing that neurodivergencies tend to have in common, is having some working memory issues, and that's being able, as I said earlier, to hold information in your mind temporarily. Being understanding about reminders and being willing to let individuals use apps or websites that they want to use during meetings to accommodate needs would be helpful. Direct communication without hinting. Just giving clear, concise expectations, and also if making sure that there isn't unnecessary things that require fine motor skills, or also maybe giving options. Sometimes there was issues where it just seemed like there was a couple of things that needed fine motor skills that it could have been done easier, including one was actually like a door handle or something they had problems with. But that goes with, for context, people with dyspraxia have coordination issues. And that's, as Amy said, common with autism.
Thank you, Larissa, for sharing that information. I would, and that's something that we do need to keep an open dialogue about, and how we address any training needs that organizations may have and HR departments may have in understanding these things, right? Because that's kind of where we have to start addressing it too. All right, so I do have another question, one more, and this is kind of a broader question for everybody. Jonathan, if you have thoughts on this, I would love for you to chime in as well. Also, Jonathan did put his number or his contact information, Jonathan De La Rosa, in the chat for Disability Rights Texas. So if there's questions around, am I being discriminated against in the workplace because I'm disclosed, or issues with accommodations and stuff, just feel free. And there's a phone number in there as well. So feel free to reach out. He put his direct email on there. So we offer that up here in the chat. Thank you, Jonathan, for doing that. And then Jordan also just shared a brainstorming app. And Jordan, do you want to speak to this just for a second, since you put it in the chat?
Very useful tool if you're looking for something to assist with to-do lists and general executive functioning things. Super useful. There are other apps like it as well. So I just thought I'd share it. We did have another question come through that I sent over to Martha about 504 programs.
Okay.
If we want to tackle that at this time.
Let's go ahead and jump back and do that really quick, and then we'll finish up this last question and move forward. What was the question about 504 programs?
It says that someone is asking about their son who's considering A&M, Texas Tech, Texas State, Baylor, and Trinity, asking, do they have good 504 programs for people on the spectrum? I'm going to try and unravel the different pieces very quickly, because there's a couple things going on. You've got 3 schools there that are state schools and 2 that are private. And there's not really a 504 program at any college, but they will have a department devoted to providing accommodations. So I would say first look at the information each college has on their website. Private colleges and universities, and this is kind of a double-edged sword, don't have the same strict guidelines for providing accommodations that schools, institutions that receive federal funding will. So it can be a little bit different. So I'd say first look at their websites, look at their information about their disability services offices and how they go through their process for determining appropriate accommodations. Then I would look for additional supports that they provide. Whether it's something like Larissa mentioned, like, do they have allies for students with autism? Do they have something like ACC has, like Access Autism? What do they have outside of the accommodation realm to support that student, their growth, their development? Because so much of it is outside of accommodations and academics. It has so much more to do with social and getting connected and getting involved. So there's a lot of different parts to it, and keeping in mind the differences among those institutions as you search. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Martha. Yeah, thank you for shedding some light on that. The last question we have here is that at least I have for the panelists, and then we'll get to the Q&A in the chat, is what message can we leave here with regarding the employment side? What message can we leave here with hiring managers and HR staff in regards to becoming more inclusive? What do you think is the takeaway? And any of our panelists can answer, including Jonathan.
So last time I actually went to one of these, somebody in the presentation said that accessibility drives innovation. And I find that to be extremely important because, in making something accessible for everyone, you will find that everybody, even people who may not have the same disability that needs to be accommodated, will benefit. I've seen that professionally, I've seen it personally. Like, if you are trying to accommodate everybody, everybody benefits. So I feel like that's something for, to encourage employers to keep in mind.
Thank you, Jonathan. I love that. I just tried to put in the chat that I think I actually sent it directly to Jordan, but I love that accessibility drives innovation. That's wonderful. I love that. Anybody else? If not, we will go ahead and move into our Q&A. And Martha added in the chat, universal design in the classroom and the workplace. Yeah, and we in our autism friendly business trainings, one of the things we do like to say is, whatever you put in place that's going to make life better for individuals with autism is most likely going to make life better for everybody. So why not, consider that accessibility point of, hey, let's meet these needs and make these environments more pleasant to be in. So it helps everyone. Okay, so do we have anything in Q&A we want to go ahead and tackle for anybody?
So Amy, at this time, I don't know if there's any questions we haven't answered. I'm just scrolling back up through the chat.
Oh, good. Okay.
If anyone does have a question that's been hanging out in their mind, feel free to submit it now.
So I'm just typing in. There's a couple.
Oh yeah, Leslie said there's a few.
Oh, so we got one from Andrew. Tester for okay. Martha may want to tackle this one. Is it okay to ask for a practice test or example of a test? It's somewhere like Austin Community College or in that post-secondary environment.
I tell students you can always ask, and it will depend on the instructor. And any of you who are students or have been students, some instructors will commonly distribute old copies of tests. They'll give practice tests, others won't. But you could also go online and search for practice tests, sample problems. So if you're looking for that practice, it's out there. Even if it's not coming from the instructor, you can look around, you can do a search. I know lots of students who go and just search YouTube and watch examples and practice that way. So it's really kind of checking into some things on your own if it doesn't come through the instructor.
Okay, thank you, Martha. Those are great suggestions. Looking around and seeing, because more likely than not, if you have a question about something or something's complicated for you, it's going to be complicated for somebody else, and somebody else is going to have that same question. And so the fact that you're willing to ask that question and seek out that information means you're a step ahead, right? Because sometimes people just don't bother asking or don't bother seeking it out because they think they're the only one, when in reality, it helps everyone to ask that and to get that information. So you're not the only one. So when we did answer the question about the 504 stuff that just popped up in the chat, I do want to go ahead and put into the chat our employment at texasautismsociety.org. I hope I spelled that correctly. That is where you can email if you have any questions about our up and coming pre-employment program. The new cohort is going to start in October. So we are taking spots for the enrollment spots for that right now currently. Feel free to reach out to us regarding that. And our next panel, we are going to cover a little bit about some conflict management and resolution in the workplace. We are going to be talking to some human resources people about how to tackle that within the organization and across various environments. So I hope everyone joins us for that one, because it will be touching a little bit on some of what we've talked about already this evening. And with that, it's 9:15. So I know we gave ourselves till 9:30 to go through some Q&A, but we don't have as much Q&A now. So I'm going to say thank you to our panelists and to everybody who came to be a part of this evening. We really appreciate you being here. This is being recorded, so if anybody needs access to it, please let us know. We will be sending information that's pertinent to this presentation, probably throughout the next, by Tuesday, you should have that. So you can kind of be looking through, because sometimes it takes us a few days to digest some of this information and process it. And we may want to go back to it later on and go, wait a minute, I have a question and I know they talked about it and I can't remember what it was. So we want to make sure you have access to that. And so we really hope everyone enjoyed this presentation tonight. Again, we want to thank our panelists for being here. We're really glad you got to share, not only from your own personal experience, but from your expertise. So I'm going to wish you all a good night, and we will hopefully talk to all of you guys soon.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Oh, I'm muted. You guys, Larissa, Delaney, Miles, you guys did amazing. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here.
Home run, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here. This has been fantastic. And I know it's late. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
All right.
Have a
Sounds
good
good.
night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, y'all.